Our next speaker is Dr. Michael Doyle, who, in my opinion, is the person that I think most of us, there's so much mystery contained in the medicine, and he's going to break that down for us a little bit, so thank you very much.
Thanks. If you're going to sit in a medical clinic and make some very informed choices, it's helpful to know, are you two dads? Are you one dad? Are we looking to make one baby? Do we hope to have twins? Do we hope to have extra embryos stored? Because frozen embryos these days with current technology work every bit as well as fresh embryos. So the options exist to place an embryo into your carrier and become pregnant and return a few years later for the sibling project, if you will, or to dip into the pool of embryos of the partner who didn't achieve biological paternity the first time. So choice and control are immense, and they're all yours. Along with that comes the responsibility, and I think part of the responsibility that you have requires that you understand how we break down each of the steps. So that's what I'm going to do now. We choose donors based on strongly medical and genetic characteristics. Because as John said, who your ideal carrier is much more about her previous obstetrical history, her psychosocial environment, her support systems, who she is as a person, maybe not so much about her age, and certainly very little, really none about her genetic makeup, because her genes are not being infused. But to pick an egg donor, or for us to screen our egg donors and offer you the best donors, we look at very, very biological things. And that's why egg donors often come from more medical clinics or medically based agencies, and surrogates seldom come from medical clinics because it's less of a medical issue. So we look at biological things that have to do with how many eggs they're likely to produce and the quality of their eggs. And we have a genetic counselor who's actually here today, who does a vast degree of screening for a variety of genetic diseases that are non-specific, and then specific genetic testing for the donor to match up with whatever your potential issues might be. The donors are usually under 25, never over 30, because the younger egg donors tend to produce more eggs and they tend to produce better quality eggs. But that's not to say if you have a 32-year-old friend or your partner has a 33-year-old sister and he's not contributing sperm and you wouldn't use her. It's just that the relative likelihoods of success are driven in favor of younger donors, and unless you give me reason to do anything otherwise, we're going to always guide you to make the decisions that maximize your pregnancy rate from the very beginning. About 75% of our donation surrogacy cycles work the first time. And for the 25% that don't, it's quite common to have frozen embryos. And when we thaw embryos now using a relatively new technique called vitrification, which our embryologists will also be here soon, can talk to you about, achieves the same pregnancy rates with these frozen and later down the road thawed embryos as you would get if you were using embryos fresh. So the egg donors are, of course, psychologically and emotionally screened, and we do our share of psychosocial evaluation and personal evaluation as well. But the real breaking point for most of our donors, we probably choose about 1 in 20 or 25 women who apply, is the very biological, because that's really what you're choosing and purchasing is biological protophyte eggs that carry genes, and we do our very, very best, as I'm sure all good clinics do, to provide you with the healthiest of the eggs with the least risk of genetic issues or short-term issues in pregnancy. When you can get as close to knowing what you are trying to achieve, you can in a more informed way choose which option you would like to choose for your egg donor. So besides picking who's your ideal egg donor, based on things that are important to you and things that will tell you, you have the option to get all her eggs, and a typical egg donor produces around 20 eggs in an egg retrieval. And that's way more than most people need to finish their family, but 20 eggs is for most people, 5 minutes, more than enough to do what you need, get everything done that you want to get done and have extra embryos. Some people feel, I don't really need or want, or particularly want to pay for the whole process that leads to that. What if there was a way that could I just have half of them? Well, the answer is yes. There are shared options that are very ideal for people who who are looking to have one baby, or maybe don't have two dads involved when we split the eggs in half, and then we're down to fewer eggs for each. And what's, I'd say, most exciting, when people always ask me, what's the newest, coolest, most advanced thing that's going on in fertility, it's now that frozen eggs are used. We use them actually very routinely in my clinic, and we're able to have our egg donors donate their eggs and freeze them. And just as sperm donors have sort of done all for many years, frozen sperms routinely shipped all over the country and thaw, and tends to work well. I'd say that the news today is that frozen eggs has now reached the same level of success and effectiveness that has fresh eggs. And so you can choose a donor who's donated a year ago and maybe gone back to graduate school, or you can choose a donor that you really like now and use the eggs and freeze the embryos without being synchronized to a carrier that maybe isn't available to you yet. So it just kind of opens up a lot more options and flexibility, which is, of course, great as long as it doesn't lower your pregnancy rate. And that's been the stumbling block for the last 10 years in technology that we're past. And we're not the only clinic anymore that's getting pregnancies routinely, but we're up to 70% or so with frozen eggs. Probably the very last question that comes up, because it deals with the risk, is, well, how many embryos do you put in? Well, we all know about Octomom, and we all know that these treatments work. And that's the good news. This isn't really rocket science anymore. This is really simple. You're taking highly fertile carriers, and they're interviewed and chosen for that reason, and linking them with women whose eggs are of superior quality and working with fertile men. So it's not a question anymore if as it may have been 21 years ago or even 10 years. Oh, what a miracle this would be, or this is amazing, I hope it works. It's really about, it's going to work in 99% of situations, and what we can then do is focus less on the anxiety of the nuts and bolts of the science and let us do that, or let your doctor do that, and focus more on the process and the choices and the control that you have, and know that you have some influence if you put one embryo in instead of two. That's pretty much where we're at now. We're seldom putting in three, and there have to be some pretty extenuating circumstances, and you probably imagine they have a lot to do with the carrier as well as you. But there are issues that now allow us to keep the technologies highly effective, and the worst case scenario for many people is the best case scenario. You get twins. We're not needing to push the technology nearly as much as we did before to try to compensate for lower pregnancy rates, because the science has really gotten that good. So the last thing I'd want to say is there are ways to evaluate embryos that we can grade them, A+, A-, A-, and of course we'll always pick the highest grade embryo to transfer, or maybe the one of each of a couple if that's necessary. And because these egg donors are so young and fertile, the techniques that are sometimes used with fertility treatments, like biopsying embryos or evaluating them in more invasive ways, while those are still options, are seldom necessary with IVF anymore, because when you, like I said, you start up front with donors, and many egg donors have donated before, but everybody always has their first job, I suppose, but most of our egg donors, and I think it's common everywhere, have previous donations, so you can look at a donor from all the personal characteristics that are important to you, and also know, oh wow, she donated as the donor that you'll meet today, Stephanie, she donated once, and the person got twins, and then she used her frozen eggs, and then that person got twins, and then she donated again, and that person got, and that's a resume that is hard to overlook when you're looking at egg donors, and it can be very empowering as well, and something that brings the science together with the rest of the matching process.